one of my favorite things that to use if someone ever asked me like, hey, how are you different than your competition? We got asked that all the time at All About. How are you different than Salesforce communities? How are you different than in partner? And I would always flip it and say, well, if you asked Salesforce if you asked in partner, they might say, we're a young company and there's risk associated with that. And you know what, Jason? That would not be untrue. We are a young company. But what you get in return is you get scrappiness. You get an unrelenting desire to help you become successful. And so own it, control the narrative, and then your competition can't use it against you when you're the one that brought it out and put it out in the first place.
So I got to ask, because I was doing some perusing on your LinkedIn, personal trainer. How do you go from personal trainer into salesperson, sales leader, now founder? What was that first thing that got you hooked on sales?
So when I was a personal trainer, there was a basketball player in the Sacramento Kings that had an accident working out. And the big gym balls, big round 40-inch balls, whatever they are. He was doing dumbbell press on one of those balls with like 80 pounds in each hand, and the ball burst underneath him. Oh, and he fell on his back, broke both of his arms, ended his career. And at the same time I was a personal trainer, I was actually going to school to become a physical therapist. And I was focusing on like stroke rehab. And one of the biggest things is there's this like psychological inhibitor stroke victims have, where they see something, and that visual of an unstable surface kind of causes them to not perform well physically. And so one of the key things you want to get stroke patients doing is like being exposed to unstable surfaces. Well, that unstable surface creates apprehension and tension in the stroke victim, and so they can't go into that unstable surface. So those two events were kind of simultaneously happening. And so I invented a piece of exercise equipment called the core bench. It was essentially an unstable surface on a steel metal workout bench, and had some success with that. The bench is still used in almost every NBA gym today. Most MLB teams are still using it. One of my most fond memories was I actually got to train Drew Brees in the Saints locker room on the bench. Nice. I ran the company to the ground. I didn't know how to manage a business, but I loved selling my own product. I loved kind of getting people to sign a contract and pay for something. And that was kind of the genesis of me wanting to get into sales. Is kind of saw a problem, invented a piece of workout equipment, and just had so much fun selling it. Didn't know what I was doing from a business standpoint. And then one of my good friends at the time was like, hey, you seem to be enjoying sales. Why don't you get into software sales? And next thing I know, I was an SDR at a company called Acton Software.
Is Acton based in Portland, Oregon, actually?
They are. They're not so well known anymore. Back in the heyday, they competed pretty head to head against HubSpot, Marketo, and Pardot, but they could never keep up from a product standpoint. So they've kind of become like a D, E, F player in the marketing automation space.
Yeah. Okay, so let's just backtrack a bit. I got to ask you, selling that first core bench, that machine, what was that experience like? What were you feeling? Were you scared? Were you nervous to sell it? Were you like feeling overconfident about it? Like, what was going on in your head?
So the first sale I had, actually, we went to a trade show where I kind of introduced the bench to the world. And it was the most hideous, like unorganized trade show booth you've ever seen. We literally were duct taping pictures that we took like the day before with like friends working out on the workout bench, like on the walls behind the bench. And this guy walks up to me. He's like, hey, I want to buy one. I was, what? Hold on. You want to what? And I couldn't sell it to him, actually, because I had no way to like accept money. I only had the one version, the one prototype. So the first sale I got was a complete disaster, Jason. I couldn't actually deliver on the first sale at the time when that person came up to me and asked to buy our first core bench. Um, so the first quote unquote sale, the first person who wanted to buy one actually had to wait like 3 months for actually us to produce it
Oh,
and get
wow.
it shipped over here and stuff. So the first sale was a complete disaster.
Good thing you're selling software now, right? Where it's just like it's there, it's ready to go. It's like
That was that was a hard lesson with manufactured goods is that
Yeah.
supply chain and shipping and cost of goods, like those are all real struggles. And I have a very huge appreciation for anybody who actually wants to get into anything that's like actually manufactured.
Mhm.
We have very lucky in the software sales world for sure.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, we had talked about the theme of this episode kind of being this selling for a scrappy startup, which you have so much experience doing. And I relate to you a lot in this regard too, because I've always been kind of a scrappy, you know, like my first kind of full-time job was I got hired on as a marketing director for a company that sells a lot of house painting services across the United States. And I was like a head of like marketing and then also like a corporate sales trainer that would travel around. But the first thing they tasked me with was building in a call center. And I had no idea what call center software was, like what a predictive dialer is. Do we need headsets, cubes? How do we get them data? How do we get to sync up with all that kind of stuff, right? So I really relate with you in that regard. I'm curious though, because sometimes what I hear reps talk about that are in these positions selling for these startups is there's they find it hard to be really confident when they're selling because they are unsure about the company's ability to kind of deliver on their promises because maybe it's something that's a little bit outside of their normal ICP. Maybe it's something that's a little bit of a bigger company than they normally would sell to. What was that experience like for you? Did you go through any of that kind of journey? How do you deal with the kind of the mindset piece behind that?
There was an Acton and then All Bounds. There was so many times where I would get off a call and be like, I don't think we can make this work. Like they are so far beyond advanced of where kind of our product was. And what I came to realize is that if you own that as part of the sales process, you acknowledge that and you're upfront about it, kind of where you're at as a company. Um, I have found that prospects lean into that story. The right prospects will lean into that story. They want to be a part of something. They want to be an early adopter. Um, and so initially, I would be like, I can't close this deal. Like this is going to fall apart. But then I realized that people, if you were honest about it, like even at Abstrakt, like we tell people, hey, we've been in business 2.5 years. We've had customers for about a year now. We're very early stage. Yes, there's risk associated with that. But on the flip side, you have a direct say in the product roadmap. You have my cell phone number. Like if you need something, you call me. And the right prospects will lean into that. And I've found that owning that and giving folks an opportunity to be part of a story or part of success, something that they can say, hey, I was an early adopter in that. I feel like regardless of company, there's people out there that lean into that and want to be a part of that. And I learned to leverage that to my advantage.
That's interesting. I never thought about it under that context. When you think of the biggest software companies in the world, they all had their first set of customers that took chances on them.
Yeah.
you know, every single one of them had to get these first customers. And I love what you said around owning the narrative. It's I don't know. It's kind of like this is kind of a funny story. I got a bloody nose in the middle of a training call last week.
Okay.
There's like several dozen people on there. And I was thinking, I don't normally get embarrassed about stuff, but I was like, oh God, there's like 40 people on here and I have a nosebleed, and I had to go to the doctor one time and the doctor told me, like, dude, Jason, you just need to stop picking your nose. That's what's going on here. This was a little different. This is from allergies though. So um I thought in that moment, I was like, I could either just own this or pretend like I have to go to the bathroom, you know? And even something really silly like that, like, hey, you guys, I'm sorry, I have allergies, I get nosebleeds. Like, give me a minute. That makes me feel way different because I'm just owning it and we don't have to think about it any more than what it is and we can just move on. And I think that this is kind of going on with what you're saying too, where it's like, yeah, let's just be upfront about all of this stuff. And more importantly, let's help you figure out if you're in the bucket of an early technology adopter or not. And it almost is like I think the best, let me know what you think of this. I think one of the best positions to be in sales is when you put something like that out there and it's like a take it or leave it kind of thing. And you're like, hey, it's okay if this is not for you, actually. Tell me why this might be a fit.
100%.
And then they're almost like selling you on why they would be interested in participating in that narrative and that story with you. What do you think?
I 100% agree. And I'd also say when you own that, it immediately takes away your competitor's opportunity to use that against you. One of my favorite things that to use if someone ever asked me like, hey, how are you different than your competition? We got asked that all the time at All About. How are you different than Salesforce communities? How are you different than in partner? And I would always flip it and say, well, if you asked Salesforce or if you asked in partner, they might say, we're a young company and there's risk associated with that. And you know what, Jason? That would not be untrue. We are a young company. But what you get in return is you get scrappiness. You get an unrelenting desire to help you become successful. And so own it, control the narrative, and then your competition can't use it against you when you're the one that brought it out and put it out in the first place.
Yeah. You're taking away the objection. You're anticipating it and taking it away. And I don't even know what that is, but there's something that when people are selling solutions to Abstrakt, actually, do you hop on many sales calls where you're being sold to these days?
Uh, I have not had a single vendor that I haven't already done business with in previous roles reach out to me and try to sell me something.
Really?
Shocked, like shocked. And like, I'm waiting for the first day someone tries to cold call me. I am waiting for like an email. I'm waiting for a LinkedIn message. Like, don't get pitched to.
Oh, this is crazy. The reason you're probably going to get like hit up by because a bunch of salespeople listen to this. Where you hit up down here. The reason I was asking that is that I find in the vendors that we work with, I mean, we're a small business. I still really like working with that smaller company that's going to give me really good customer support. And we were talking about this before we hit recording, and we won't mention the company names, obviously, but there's some very big vendors out there in the sales space that they have a really great product and really poor customer service. And there are so many people that would take a quote unquote inferior product just to have comfort in knowing that someone's going to answer their email when shit hits the fan. You know,
100%.
that is such a
100%.
big motivator for people.
I think there's a lot of technologies out there today that have been commoditized. Technology, like it's not hard to take something and duplicate a functionality from a competitor's product into your product when you understand maybe how the code works and things like that, right? Like there's a lot of products out there that send emails. There's a lot of products out there that schedule emails. The point of differentiation really can be the experience of working with the person who picks up the phone when you call for support. And in the game of LTV and kind of the multiples companies, and especially in the SaaS space, are looking for, like the cost to support that customer is pennies compared to what they could be worth over the course of 5 years, 7 years. I don't get it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So this mindset piece, I think this is a really big kind of first part of it. So what I took away from that is like really owning the narrative, especially in
Yep.
your head, and turning your quote unquote weakness into a strength. It's like just own this. And there are certain companies that won't be on board, but a lot of them will, and a lot of it's just owning it. It reminds me of the man or woman that is not as confident, or sorry, not as good looking, but very confident. It like puts them up a couple points on the look scale.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You get like two, I think. I think it
Yeah,
at
that's what I
least
was saying.
counts for
You
two.
get 2 points. So same kind
Yeah.
of thing. Um, okay, so what about? I think another thing that we could talk about is kind of targeting. I think is a really interesting challenge in a scrappy startup where you don't really maybe have clear ICPs, or maybe there's a vertical that you've established that's pretty good, or you're maybe kind of figuring out what personas still are going to be receptive. What's your experience been in that area, and what do you sort of recommend? Again, if I'm a rep or I'm a sales leader and I'm thinking about, hey, we don't really have like clear targeting. What should we be focused on, and how should we kind of think about that in your experience?
That's such a good question, Jason. I've had a lot of conversations with VCs this week as we're closing out our seed round.
Oh, congrats.
And
Awesome.
thank you. That question comes up all the time because they look at our website and they see that we have a handful of different like verticals or markets where we play in. And I think this is a tough question. This is tough for someone in like a sales capacity to kind of understand or to think about if they the company needs to be. Let me back up. So here at Abstrakt, we have a handful of different verticals, and the question was like, who's your ICP? I don't know who my ICP is, um, and the reason I don't know what that is because we have a couple different verticals or markets. The one that has the fastest sales cycle and the highest ACV has our slowest time to launch and our lowest number of percentage of daily active users. So they close fast for a high dollar amount, but they take forever to implement. And once they get implemented, they have our lowest daily active users. Our slowest sales cycle, our smallest deals, are the fastest to implement. And on average, about 90% of their users are daily in our platform. So when I think about ICP, I'm looking at it from like long term. Which one of these customers is going to churn? Which one has the greatest
Yeah.
opportunity to upsell? That's hard to do if like I'm a sales rep at a company where you don't have insight into some of those metrics. And so what I would say is when you're going out and trying to find your ICP, have a thesis, have an hypothesis of who you want to go after, and draw a line in the sand for when you're going to stop going after them if success isn't found. And success could be we've generated opportunities, we have closed some deals. It's tough at an early stage, and I think one of the things that Scott Salkin, our CEO at Allbound, was okay with. He's like, let's go close every deal possible, and let's let that help us figure out who our ICP is because we don't know. And so let's go close customers in healthcare. Let's go close customers in manufacturing. Let's go close customers in B2B SaaS. And a year from now, we'll have an answer to that. And his commitment to us was we'll have enough money in the bank to help us last that long to where we can get that answer. And so there's a couple different things there. I think it's not an easy answer. You just got to try stuff out and then go ask your CEO, go ask your VP of customer success. If you're in an early stage startup, like which customers are actually closing the fastest and actually using the product the most? And that might help give you some direction.
Oh, just the answer to those two questions alone would give you so much data. Um, yeah, I asked that again because a lot of reps listening to this are probably in a situation like that where just asking a couple questions and looking at the data can really, because I'm thinking someone that's doing a lot of outbound too. Because with outbound, it's like you gotta pick some niches, otherwise your messaging is just going to be extremely broad. So, what about? I love that your focus, by the way, is on long term retention of customers. It's such a big thing where I don't sell software, but in our individual program and outbound squad, we have a pay by the month or pay for an annual, kind of thing. And it's really easy to just push for annual payments or a year-long contract and not really think about it after that. And then before you know it, 12 months down the road, you're dealing with all this churn, because you didn't deliver
Yep.
on your stuff. It's a really easy, as a software company, I would imagine that's getting funding to feel pressure, to kind of do that stuff. So, okay, from a targeting standpoint, like if we kind of transition into customer stories, that's always what people talk about is case studies, customer stories. What's that journey been like for you at Abstrakt in terms of because obviously that's one of the big things in a sales professional's arsenal is to have those kind of stuff. But what's that been like for you? I guess that journey, because you guys have a ton of that on the site now, but what was that like selling without some of that stuff? You at the beginning, what did you do? When people ask you, so who are you working with? You know?
Uh, so this is going out into the world, I guess. All right, I'll just own it. I mean, sometimes you make stuff up, man. Like early days, sometimes you just have to kind of grow into it because you don't have those customer stories. I feel like in a lot of ways, I'm blessed to have started a software in which I am the target buyer. I am the target persona. I was that person for 8 years, whether as an end user or as a sales leader. And so when I go into conversations early stage, I started Abstrakt to solve for this, this, and this. Do any of those resonate with you? All the time. Yes, those absolutely all resonate with me. And so when we think about messaging, if I'm an SDR and I'm going into healthcare, or let's finance, we started our company to solve for this, this, and this. Are you struggling with any of those things today? And so I think it's regardless of kind of the market or the industry you go in, if you're a scrappy startup and the pain points of that executive in that vertical at that time, so like relevance and reason, we talk about that all the time in outbound prospecting. Use the language that they use, right? Maybe if you're very early stage, cutting edge, maybe you're helping them describe the problem. Maybe you're helping them put a name to the problem they don't know how to describe yet. And so I think that's something that you can do when you don't have the big logos, when you don't have the case studies, is just maybe help them describe the pain that they're facing. They just don't know it yet. Or use the language that they use. And that's, you could probably figure it out in half a day by calling a few folks and saying, hey, I'm asking for some feedback in terms of what language I should use. What are your pain points? Ask people to help you, and they generally will. So I think that was a very long-winded answer, Jason.
No, I like it. Do you find because when you started Abstrakt, in software, so you guys started it, 2 or 3 years ago. In software, people kind of know what call recording is and conversational intelligence and, that sort of stuff. And some of these other verticals, because you work with like recruiters and contact centers and that kind of stuff, do you find that the market is less educated? And if so, do you approach those conversations any differently?
Love that question. So what's fascinating. They don't know the technology, don't know it exists. But they have models, and their whole thesis on how they train people and how they measure people is perfectly tailored for the way Abstrakt works. And so it's a little bit different, right? You have B2B software, conversational intelligence, natural language processing. Like everybody knows what these things are in B2B software. Often they don't know, and they haven't wrapped their head around how to apply the technology to their sales process. Contact centers, recruiting, they don't know the technology exists, but they've already wrapped their head around how to apply the technology if they find it. And so absolutely, it's 100% different.
Tell me more about that.
Which part?
So the other parts outside of B2B SaaS, they already kind of know how they would utilize a technology like this. They don't really understand very much about the technology though, or whether it exists. So how do you
Yeah,
talk to them? I guess
that's
is my question. What does the first sales interaction, kind of sound like? Because a lot of your stuff is, I think, coming in through inbound referral channels, that sort of stuff. What kind of education does someone in these industry verticals have coming into this? And maybe if I could, one other thing, I'm curious if you get the, oh, this is just call recording. We can already do that. We already record our calls. You know what I mean? Like, I'm curious, like, what does that sound like? What are you talking to people about?
so on that kind of first discovery call. Let's say it's a contact center. It's what's we talk a lot more about efficiencies. I would say kind of lagging indicators as opposed or leading indicators as opposed to lagging indicators. B2B software, like a lagging indicator of success, could be a meeting booked or a qualified opportunity. So indicators of future success. Um, in kind of the recruiting world, we talked about like leading indicators, compliance, your patience on a call, your interruption period, and how are you measuring those? And then how much time are you taking out of your day to QA those calls? And it becomes almost like a time saving thing, an efficiency gain, because that's one person who can now QA 600 calls as opposed to 8 calls or 10 calls. Um, when we get into the world of B2B software sales, that kind of efficiency language falls on deaf ears. Um, the idea of measuring somebody on their interruption or their patience on a cold call is not something I've found that anybody has any interest in talking about in B2B software sales.
Yeah.
So the things that they're looking to measure in like an insurance contact center world, they already are trying to measure those, but they're doing it manually with a human. And so the idea of like, oh my God, if this technology could do this, this, and this, and we're like, and we show a demo and they're like, yep, check, check, check. So they already have an idea in their mind of what they want the technology to do. They want to measure kind of how often somebody's interrupting people. Are they adhering to certain things? And it's almost like if they knew about Gong, if they knew about Chorus, they would be buyers of it already. I'm just thankful they don't know about those tools yet.
Yeah. So what I heard there is really understanding what the prospect measures and what's important to them and helping them do more of that. And it's the same solution no matter what vertical you're selling it into. It literally is the same solution. You're not customizing it in any way. It's the same exact thing, just different language. And it's one thing I always try to explain to sellers is that because the very first thing that I'll do when I'm working with a team in outbound is we create a messaging matrix, and it's basically a table of, hey, people like Greg, he's a VP of sales. What are typical priorities for someone like this? What are the problems that get in the way? How are they typically solving for that right now? And what do they want? And like, you have to start the conversation with something they already want to accomplish and then attach your thing to that. It's not about getting them to care about something they don't already care about, With Abstrakt and just any of your other previous experience, was there anything that you did that was intentional around learning what's important to your customers and the language that they use? Was there, like, did you do customer interviews? Did you keep logs of stuff, documents, notes? How do you keep track of all of this stuff?
So yes, one of the things like at Act On Software, I went and I listened to every single webinar I could find being put out by HubSpot, by Marketo, by Pardot. Um, I immersed myself in the language that our competition was using to figure out how they were talking about the pain points of the market. Did the same thing at Allbound in partner Salesforce communities, Channeltivity. I went out and I because take advantage of their kind of wide net that they've already casted of their knowledge. And so I found that it was an easy way to go out and kind of learn the language and learn the lingo of the market that I was going into and how other vendors were talking about their solutions and the problems. At Allbound, we didn't have a lot of customers. There weren't a lot of opportunities to talk with customers before we went out to try to sell. And so Jen Spencer, the VP of marketing at that time, she had a great idea where she started her own podcast. And so we brought heads of channel sales on board, and it actually turned into pretty sweet lead gen, demand gen kind of activity. But ultimately, we started recording podcasts with heads of channel, VPs of channel, and we would hear about their pain points. We would hear about their problems, what they were trying to solve for. And we would take literally whatever words they used, and we would use that in our copy for our outbound prospecting. Like literally just take it from the podcast guest. And so it was kind of our hack around not having customers to talk to. We'd go find and use kind of play to their ego. Hey, come talk about your experience and your awesomeness on our podcast. We would turn around and use that messaging. I did the same thing at Abstrakt. We've had a podcast for 2 years, and a lot of it was, let's go out and validate some of our thoughts around the market. Let's get a bunch of sales leaders, thought leaders in the sales world. Let's see what language they're using to describe how they're trying to solve problems. And let's go use that language on our website. Let's use that language in our prospecting, use that language in our demos. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really interesting, the podcast piece. Some of these bigger companies, well, you don't even need to be a big company. Like it sounded like starting a podcast was one of the very first things that you guys thought about from a marketing standpoint.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's such a basic thing. There's so many
Conflicts.
huge companies right now with no podcasts. I'm like, that's a differentiator. If you're listening and you're a sales rep or a sales leader and you're at a scrappy startup, start a podcast and then feature whoever the expert is at your company, that's building the product or one of the founders, and just co-host something and start interviewing people. It is like you said, easiest form of lead gen you can ever ask for. And if nothing else, you're networking and you're bringing on people that represent your target market, and you'll be able to ask them questions and learn about their world and the language they use.
Absolutely. And I mean, again, there was a little bit of ulterior motive there where we knew that the people that we were interviewing were going to go out and share it on their LinkedIn. They were going to talk about it. They were going to be proud to talk about it. And so it helped us get some exposure very early on. And it literally only cost us our time, right? We had a free Zoom license. We could record 30 minutes. We kept our podcast to 30 minutes. So it was like, it was free to go out and kind of do that customer research before you actually have customers, before you actually know what messaging you should use. Like, it doesn't have to cost a lot of money to go out and get some validation and market awareness around your product and your solution.
Love that, man. Okay. Let's talk about sales process. So another thing that I hear a lot too is people are selling and they're walking into a situation where there isn't really a formal sales process. Maybe their company's provided them with a deck, and a few case studies, and they're not even sure, like, do I demo in the first call? Should the first call be 60 minutes or 30? I mean, they're still figuring out all of that kind of stuff. What advice do you have for someone in a situation like that, based on your experience doing this a bunch of times, just figuring out what the sales process should even look like?
What I would do is I would go get demos from all of your competitors and see how they're running their sales process. That would be something that I've always done, is try to get demos from everybody to see kind of how people are thinking about presenting their solution to the market. And then the second thing that I've always believed in is let the prospect determine how they want to buy. Like, there's really no reason to force people into any type of sales process. I think it's selfish when companies try to force prospects into a sales motion. I think there's enough research out there that people already kind of generally know what they want to know before ever talking to a sales rep. And so when they show up and get forced into this box that no one wants to be forced into, I think it just creates friction and lengthened sales cycles. More kind of specific, on every single first call that I ever have with somebody new, the first thing I always do is a takeaway. And it works like magic every single time. Like, hey, Jason, awesome meeting you. Before we begin, set a quick agenda. My goal here is that we want to find out as fast as possible if we're a good fit for you or not. If we can help you, awesome. We might jump into a demo. If we can't, my goal is to tell you as fast as possible and give you 20 minutes back in your day. Does that sound like a plan? Yes, it does. Cool. Then every time works like a charm. They instantly open up and everything they're looking for, what they like, what they don't like, who they looked at, because walls are down. So do your research on your competition. Don't force people into a box. Lower those walls and those protective kind of mechanisms against salespeople as fast as possible. And everything else, I hate decks. Like, I will never use a PowerPoint deck my entire life in a sales process. But some people like them, and some larger enterprise buyers want some of that validation from the market on kind of who they're looking at. And so I think it all is just fluid and dynamic based on what the prospect wants.
Yeah, the piece that you did there at the beginning of the call, I really like, because it's telling you that I'm not going to try to push this down your throat and like sell you something that you don't need. And it's such a simple thing to do, and it's so refreshing, to a buyer to come into a situation like that. Tell me more about your take on slide decks and stuff, though. So, what do you use instead of that?
I always, every single time, I start with the customer's website up. Whenever I start sharing my screen, that I do everything I possibly can to make it about them. My SDRs here at Abstrakt, Tiffany was like, "Why don't we know more about the product?" Because your job is not to know about the product. Your job is to find pain points and be relatable and make sure that that person on the other end of the phone call understands that this is about them, not about us. I think that extends into the sales motion, especially on a first call. The moment you throw up a slide deck, that meeting becomes about you as the vendor. That meeting is not about your prospect anymore. Unless everything on those slides is everything about your prospect, which 99.9% of the time it's not, that meeting is now all about you and showing the prospect how awesome you are, right? Prospects don't care what you did for that company over there. They care about their problems in their world and what you can do to help solve those problems right then and there. And so I just think it's a very selfish approach to sales motions 90% of the time.
Yeah, it's mostly the NASCAR decks, slides as they call them, right? The logos that we've worked with. Here's how our stuff works, features, benefits, that kind of thing. Did you
Yep.
use any conversational intelligence software prior to starting Abstrakt? Were you a customer of some of these?
So I was a huge fan of Gong. I think I was a very early adopter of Gong.
Yeah.
The case study I did with them at Allbound, I think, is their still number one most used case study. And so I've been a huge fan of their product. I think up until this time I started Abstrakt, Amit still answered my emails and phone calls and LinkedIn messages.
Yeah.
So yes, I was a huge fan of that. And I am thankful in so many ways that they kind of laid the foundation for what conversational intelligence is today, and kind of breaking down that barrier of how natural language processing and call recording can be used in sales motions.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Abstrakt. I'm curious, we've kind of teased some of the stuff out, and we'll be doing some webinars and stuff later on it, but what have been some of the interesting things that you have found, either that customers have found about their own, reps and that sort of stuff, or that you found in just some of the data?
This one's awesome. Thank you for asking that question. What's been fascinating is, and it shouldn't have been fascinating. It should not have been a surprise to me because I've experienced it throughout my sales career as an individual contributor and a sales leader, is our focus is mainly at like the SDR, BDR level. And we go through implementations where we have recommended responses that are built out. So essentially, the system is listening for this keyword or this phrase. And then when it hears that by the prospect, it delivers, here's your recommended responses. We had one customer build out like 80 of these. Every single competitor, every single product question, Um, and nearly every single one of them went unused. The objections that people face across all of our customers in the B2B world, I think it's 91% of all objections are, I'm in a meeting. How did you get my phone number? Can you call me back? I'm not the right point of contact. And what's the other one? What's the fifth one? I don't know what the fifth one is. But general brush offs.
Yeah.
At that SDR, BDR level, they are not getting product questions. They're very rarely getting price questions. Competitors very rarely come up. And the interesting part is so few of our customers actually have recommended response cards built for those. They focus on all the things that they think are actually coming up on calls and aren't actually building anything for what's actually coming up on calls, which kind of scares me a little bit because that means that they're not actually listening to as many calls as they say they're listening to when they're doing audits on their team.
Yeah. This is really interesting to me because as a sales trainer, you always want to think about what am I training people on and what am I focused on and how am I finding a balance, which is kind of tough sometimes, what people think that they want help with versus what they actually need help with. You know,
Yeah.
and it doesn't surprise me that a lot of them are shallow objections because, you know, in a cold call, especially, I mean, it's such you know, a person picks up the phone and they're task switching. I mean, they're doing something else. They're not giving you the attention they would obviously in a disco call or a demo, you know? So
Yeah.
91% of objections are ones basically that companies are not preparing their reps on how to handle. That's pretty funny,
Yeah.
actually.
It's funny, it's scary, it's painful, um, and it's but that on the other hand, like I'm thankful that that happens because like we can come in and we can become such a needle mover so quickly
Yeah.
for our customers, and so on one hand, I'm thankful for that, but it's also like as an industry, like what we need a mind shift. We need to kind of change our thinking about how we're going about arming reps to do their job. Um, you think about it, right? Like we had some math. I think we just put it out in a blog post around the like if you look at like conversion, like total calls, and then the connections and conversions, and you break that down. If you have 10 connects, 5 conversions, those other five, 4 out of those other 5 are brush offs. Like what could you do with 4 new opportunities per rep per day being added to your pipeline just by handling one of 5 objections efficiently and
Yeah.
effectively?
And I would also argue that what is the rep doing to cause those brush offs? A lot of it's I call someone and I don't sound like a peer and I just go straight into a pitch, you know?
Yep. I'm
It's
calling
interesting.
from Abstrakt. We do this, this, and this. Would you like to take a meeting? Like,
Yep.
no, like, hey, my name is Greg. Jason, you run Blissful Prospecting. Reason for my calls, I talk with sales trainers like you that are often struggling with this, this, and this. Is any of that resonating with you today?
Yep.
I mean, obviously, I might want to work on that a little bit, but the again, make it about your prospect. Don't make it about you.
Yeah. No, I love this. This was great, man. I think that the takeaways here were the mindset piece, the owning the narrative. I love that. The targeting piece, you mentioned relevance and reason. Love that piece. I think this other part around getting creative with how we learn about our market and having a podcast or something where we can invite people to is really interesting. And then, yeah, this stuff around the objections is really cool too. Uh, okay, so before we take off, I got some rapid fire questions for you that are kind of fun. You ready?
Okay. Yeah, let's go.
That was like a really sheepish, like, okay.
Uh, I, let's go. Let's go. Let's knock it out.
Yeah.
Let's go, Jason.
Yeah. Um, so this first one's through think outbound with us. So if you had to choose between phone, email, and social, not that we have to choose, but if you did have to, what do you pick and why?
Uh, phone for sure. Email, somebody can ignore me, and I don't really. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm not a huge fan of social media. So I always kind of defer back to the phone.
What is something you believe about sales that most would disagree with?
Slide decks should never be used. No, serious. On all seriousness, no. I really believe introverts make the best salespeople, and I've had a lot of heated conversations with folks around that not being true. But I'm a firm believer introverts are the best salespeople.
Yeah, I'm an introvert too, man. Uh, Lastly, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to yourself as a rookie sales rep?
So rookie sales rep, I would spend significantly less time worrying about the product features and spend exponentially more time focused on our buyer persona and what they care about.
Yeah, that's great advice. This has been awesome, Greg. Keep your eyes out. I don't know when this is going live, but if you're listening, keep your eyes out. We're going to be doing a bunch of webinars together that should be a lot of fun. Where can people go to learn about you and Abstrakt?
Yeah, so Greg Reffner's on LinkedIn. My email address is greg@abstrakt.ai. And for anybody who wants to cold call me, my phone number is 530-306-4078. And yeah, call me and give me your best shot.